God is referred to as a homogeneous mass of pure consciousness, yet the consciousness appears conditioned by the material equipments. Functioning through the body, mind and intellect becomes the conditioned consciousness, the human being. Okay, so this is what we finished off with last time. We are attempting to get some footholds, or some intellectual footholds, into understanding what this idea of reality or God is. And one of the ways he describes it is as unconditioned consciousness. So the analogy we have is of unconditioned light entering a prism. It is conditioned somehow by that body of glass, and what leaves is conditioned light, the rainbow. So in the same way, what are we experiencing? What is the individual? This thing going on that I'm aware of, this is the conditioned consciousness. At all times, I'm only aware of the consciousness as it has been conditioned by body, mind and intellect. The implication is that there is an underlying pure consciousness, as it were, coming in. So this conditioned consciousness carries with it the ego. So there is perception, emotion, action, feeling, thinking, contemplating, meditating, all going on. The equipments are doing this, and there is an experience of that. The belief that I am the perceiver, actor, feeler, thinker, contemplator, meditator, that's me, that is the ego. The notion that I am the one who is awake. Just as I have the notion I am the one who is in the dream state. Ego. So spirituality is to trace our way back to this unconditioned consciousness, an unconditioned self. So rather than there being an object of awareness, perception, emotion, thought, we are an object-free consciousness, objectless awareness. So this is spirituality. So he finished off there last time. He says, the masses have little knowledge of God and have helplessly dismissed God as something transcendental beyond human reach. Consequently, people around the world have no idea of the nature of God, his state of being. So again, we touched on this with regards to a couple of the other statements that have been made. The masses means who? It means the religious masses. Okay, there's plenty of people out there for whom this doesn't apply. But for those people who do have a religious or spiritual inclination, or history, or background, or upbringing, there is no real knowledge of God. And there is this dismissal, as he says, as something beyond human reach. Now, interestingly enough, this is exactly what Vedanta says as well, that it is beyond human reach, in the sense that it's beyond the equipments of the human being. So, go back to our analogy of the waker and the dreamer. While you are in the dream state, you can't know the waker. You have no knowledge of your waking self, your waking life, your waking personality, the fact that you're lying there in your bed. The dreamer is unable. The waker is beyond the reach of the dreamer. In the same way, here in the waking state, the self, reality, God, is beyond the equipments that we have. Body, mind, intellect. So we cannot know the self any more than the dreamer can know the waker. The dreamer must become the waker. The dreamer is lost, transitions into the waker. Happens every day. We go from one state of consciousness, one identification of who and what we are, it dissolves. It disappears in front of us. We disappear in front of ourselves and we become the waker. It seems a very natural thing. In the same way, the self, capital S, is beyond the reach of the waker while they remain as a waker. So the waker must become the self in the same way, waking up into the self, capital S. And in just the same way, the waker dissolves. The waker doesn't survive the transition from conditioned consciousness to unconditioned consciousness. In the same way that the dreamer doesn't survive that transition. When you go from the dreaming state of consciousness to the waking state of consciousness, the dreamer, the individual, the person you claim to be, does not come with you. But something does. Or it's not even that it comes with you. There's something which pervades both the waking and the dream states of consciousness. If you like, it survives the transition because it is the very space in which the waking and dream spaces coexist. Well, they don't coexist. Try that again. It is the space in which the waking and dream states exist. So you can even look for this. You know, we talked about this with some of the other aspects of this book so far. You can tease it out. You can do a little bit of reflection and find the thing that we're talking about here. When you are in the dream state, you walk around quite freely saying, I am this, I am that, I'm doing this, I'm feeling this. There is that sense of me, of I am. Irrespective of what I am being, what I am doing, these are all things that are added to it. But at the core of it, there is that sense of me, of being the center of awareness to which all of these things are ultimately delivered. When you transition from dream state to waking state, your dream world goes away, the dreaming subject disappears, the waking world and the waking subject now appear, and there is that same sense of I am. That same sense of being the center of awareness. It's not different between those two states, whereas everything else is different. The level of reality of cause and effect, the rules of the dream versus the rules of the waking state, the geography, even the person that you are, all different. What's the same is that I am. So the nature of this self, reality, God, the space in which it all takes place, is, as he says, unknown to humanity. It's beyond the reach of the equipments. We don't understand it, we can't feel it, and we certainly can't see it. And so that's what this text is for. This text is to bring to us the knowledge of reality as it has been presented in the Vedantic tradition. So it's important that we understand what we mean by the word know. You can understand the analogies, but that doesn't mean you know the thing that the analogy is talking about. You can understand the descriptions, but that doesn't mean that you know the thing being described. It's like being able to talk about oranges, where they grow, how they grow, what their composition is, what the story is, what they taste like. But if you've never eaten one, you haven't experienced it. So knowing the self means becoming the self. So these next few sections are attempting to do exactly that. He says, no idea of the nature of God, his state of being. It's interesting here, he says his state of being. So there's a traditional way of describing God in the masculine, rather than its state of being. So there's a level of surrender, if you like, or deference to tradition, even though the author goes through this at various times to say that it is without qualities, without properties, and of course that means without gender. He uses the gendered language here to say his state of being. So it's sort of a nod to the traditions that have brought this knowledge this far. So any questions on that before we move on to the first of our sort of descriptions of the nature of God? So when we say that it's not knowable, it's not experienced, it's not experienceable, it's not knowable or experienceable by the equipments that you have as a waking entity. Okay, so the equipments you have, of course, are the physical body through which you gain perceptions, colour, sound, form, smell, etc. The equipment of the mind is that which resonates with emotions, so you know your feelings. It has desires, it has likes and dislikes, impulses, attachments. That's the mind that you know. And you know the intellect, which has thoughts, ideas, reasoning, conclusions, meaning, etc. So these are the things that your waking equipment can know. What they can't know is the unconditioned consciousness. So the way to, if you like, experience it is to step out of the conditioning, which means that you drop your identification, your belief that I am this body, mind and intellect. You know, he talks about this elsewhere, that Brahman, reality, self, God, is a massive pure consciousness. So if you like, we're swimming in it. It's the old question of how would you point out water to a fish? It's the stuff you're swimming in. How do you point out the self to a human being? It's the stuff you're existing in. It's the stuff you're swimming in. You've got to take yourself out of body, mind, intellect and the conditioned consciousness, and it is seen, or rather, it is experienced, or rather, it is known. You see, all of these words are wrong. How do you show water to a fish? Take it out of the water. And then when you put it back, it knows water. So you've got to step out. So that process of stepping out of the ego is a gradual one. It starts with gaining some knowledge, and then it goes into the three integrated practices. Self-reflection, questioning what is real, what is true. Devotion, that's gratitude and that sense of radical amazement, that sense of wonderment at the natural world, at the existence and the movement of life. And service, acting in a way in which your concern is for the benefit, the well-being, the growth of others. So these three practices of knowledge, devotion and service gradually get us to thin out the ego, to reduce desires. That brings the mind down to a level in which it's calm enough to meditate. And the word meditation here has a specific definition. It means lots of different things in lots of different contexts. There's a specific definition to it here. And in that seat of meditation, you converge the mind down to a single thought, and then that itself dissolves, and what remains is thoughtless awareness. It's in that state of thoughtless awareness that the self, the pure consciousness, is realized. You wake up, if you like, into that pure consciousness as your true nature. So it's a sustained process of spiritual discipline, or sadhana is the term. And then it's experienced, if you like, again the word is wrong, but we have to borrow these terms. It's experienced outside of the realm of the body, mind and intellect, which is to say you're not using your perceptions, emotions and thoughts as an intermediary to capture it. It's being experienced directly. What is that experience like? Actually, at the end of this chapter, he gives a whole list of pointers towards that reality. And in there is a sense of what it's like from the perspective of the self-realized soul. Yeah, and it's important that we understand what God means, because there's always going to be the functioning of nature. You're always going to have thoughts, opinions, feelings, backgrounds, memories. You can't escape those. That defines the personality. What you can do, however, is witness them. So you can't wipe away your ethnicity. You can't wipe away your background. You can't wipe away your life's experiences that give you the worldview that you have. You can always modify and build on your worldview and improve it, but the point is that it's always going to be there. What you can do is recognize, I am not this. So even a self-realized soul will be operating, when you speak to them, through the worldview that they have accumulated, through their culture, through their age, through their everything. You ask one self-realized soul a question, you get an answer. Ask another self-realized soul the same question, you'll get a different answer. They're both right in the sense that the different natures are revealing different things to you, but from their perspective, I am not the question, I am not the answer. I'm not the body who's listening to your question. I'm not the mind and intellect that is responding to it. So the reason I say that is because while what you said is true, wipe away the conditionings, it can be taken in a way which in practice becomes a futile denial of nature. You can't walk away from your own nature while you're in it. You are it. And it can turn into a sort of a suppression of what's natural and attempting to not use the vehicle that you have. So in the initial stages of this, as you begin to practice that witnessing, that observation, it's the intellect. It is the intellect which has the ability to observe and abstract, meaning to sort of step one level back. So take a simple example, you're in traffic and someone cuts you off and you're furiously angry. In that moment of anger, you're not witnessing the anger, you're so embedded in it that you are the anger. And then it cools off a little bit. And you can say, oh, I'm so angry, but I shouldn't act on it. You've witnessed that anger. Now it's something that you're looking at. So what's doing the looking? Well, it's the intellect which is looking at the emotion. Same thing when it comes to your thought processes, your values and beliefs, your intentions. You can witness them. How do you witness them? Again, it's that intellect, the capacity to independently observe. And so this is why in this particular tradition the Swami is really insistent in the development of the intellect, because it's the thing that does this witnessing. Genuine witnessing that is most useful actually encompasses both mind and intellect. It's a confluence. That's where the real spiritual practice happens, but it's led by that knowledge and that capacity to observe. And that's why in one of our other texts he actually says the reality is known by the intellect. It's like, hold on, every other book, every other line says it's inconceivable. Now we're saying it's known by the intellect. What does this mean? The implication is that the intellect maintains awareness all the way through this process of study, reflection, contemplation, meditation, and it's the last equipment to let go. And so it's the implication is that it sees, if you like, the reality and then lets go. So as to the question of what is doing the witnessing, if you understand what witnessing is and if you can practice it, that's a nice to know, but it's not essential. The more important thing is to be able to get into the practice. And then the idea of what's doing the witnessing, who's doing the witnessing, it can be a useful philosophical investigation, but it can also just be intellectual entertainment and a distraction. So a little bit of knowledge to get us stable in our understanding, but more important than knowledge is practice. So the practice, as far as Vedanta envisages it, is anything which moves you away from the ego. So perceptions, emotions and thoughts are just the functioning of the equipments. The problem, and let's go back to our slide in fact, the problem is the ego. The problem is the belief, I am the equipments. So the analogy again, waker versus dreamer. You have yourself in the dream state. You believe yourself to be the dreaming subject. When you wake up, that belief disappears and you know, I'm the waker. I didn't do all of those things in the dream. So the practice of spirituality here in the waking state is much the same. It's anything which gets you away from the ego. So, how does the ego function? It has, it's embedded in its beliefs. It knows things to be true without knowing that it believes so. It grasps for things, demands, protects itself, functions from the past. It believes I alone exist, forgets that there's a center of awareness in others. All these sorts of things the ego does. So the practices to decenter the ego are what I touched on before. The first is, in fact, he puts them in a different order in one of the other texts. The first is humility, gratitude, and devotion. So you integrate these as practices into your daily life. Devotion is that surrendering to the unknown. The big philosophical questions of life, the universe, existence. How did it come into existence? How does nature function? Even big philosophical questions like how does a blade of grass get pushed out of the ground? Not from a scientific perspective, but why does it happen? Why is there something instead of nothing? How am I even capable of having a subjective experience? Why am I having any kind of experience, whether that's good, bad or indifferent? Why is there experience at all? Why isn't it just a big black nothingness? I don't know. So that's the practice for the mind. It's that surrendering. How is it working against the ego? The ego has that feeling of I know. And again, it's a feeling. It's not necessarily a conscious assertion. It's a preconceived notion. When you wake up into the dream, you don't question how did I get here. You take it for granted that I am here. There's the ego. It doesn't recognize the boundary of the dream. We do the same thing here in the waking state. A whole host of things that we take for granted about our existence. We don't question them. For the mind, we recognize I don't know. In that state of humility, the next practice is to question. What is true? What is real? And it starts with the world around you, moves deeper into your personality, into your values and your beliefs, and moves deeper into your personality. Who am I? So it's the study and the reflection of the higher values of life. This is the second practice. Higher values of life simply means a set of principles which more accurately describe how life works, and that can be relied upon to take you to greater well-being, which we're defining here as less ego. And the third practice is to take that humility, take that knowledge, and to extend your well-being to others. So that's your service component. So it means integrating again into your daily life actions where there is a benefit to something outside of yourself, unselfishness. Those practices calm the mind, and then the practice of meditation is added, as you said. In that practice of meditation, the mind converges down to a single thought. That thought is extinguished. What remains is just you. Without thoughts, without feelings, without desires, without perceptions. Just pure awareness. So the beauty of the Vedantic tradition is that it reaches you wherever you are. If you're right at the far end of the scale of your development, perfect, you meditate. If you're stepping onto it for the very first time, perfect. Just be unselfish in your activities. Get into work and study these values. So we can adapt the practices to wherever we happen to be on the path. Yeah, so it's the 4 stages of life are, if you like, correlated with this. In the first stage of life as a brahmacharya or a celibate, your focus would really be on gathering the knowledge. Historically, young people would congregate in these gurukuls, these schools where this knowledge, the knowledge of higher values, was presented. So there's your knowledge component. Now that's always going to be supported by devotion and service. The humility allows you, it opens up your awareness to reflect and to gain insights. And the service similarly calms the ego, so the sense of I know is diminished. It also opens up your heart so you have a feeling of connection. So the focus might be on the study, but the study is going to be ineffective if you don't have service and devotion. As you go through into your life, now you become a householder. The work, or rather the emphasis, might shift now onto service, action, supported by knowledge and devotion. As you go into the later stages, you might give up your work, as you say, and it might shift into devotion. I know nothing. All I know is that there is this amazing flow of matter that we call the cosmos. Okay, that might be your focus. As you move into the final stage, you might focus more on meditation. So the point you made about people dropping service and taking up meditation, if that's right for them, then that's the level they're at. And that can happen at 12, it can happen at 82. So it is about stage, but stage doesn't refer to age. Generally speaking, it happens as you grow in your physical and psychological maturity, but there's no necessary correlation. You move into each stage of practice according to what you're ready for, like anything. If you're being at university, you don't do your masters until you finish your undergrad. So the problem with meditating prior to being ready for it is that we haven't developed sufficient objectivity. We haven't developed sufficient ability to witness. And so we get into a meditative practice and believe that we are meditating, but what's actually happening is that we are developing an attachment for some aspect of the meditation itself. So the purpose of meditation is to continue to thin out and degrade the ego. If we're not prepared or really ready for meditation, what's actually happening is that we're consolidating the ego. We're building an identity around I am a meditator, and we're building an identity and desires around what we're getting out of the meditation. So yes, meditation is, for some people, they learn about this knowledge, that's where they're at, and they can go straight into it. For most people, it's the graduated path of development, as you would see in any other field. Now, you might get the odd virtuoso who picks up a piano, sits down at a piano and can just play, and they look at the notes and bang, they just do it, and they can skip all of the lessons because there's something in them where they can just see it, they can just play. But they are very much the exception rather than the rule. For the rest of us, start with lesson 1. The white keys are the whole keys, the black keys are the flats and the sharps, and move on. Thank you. Next section, the world is God. The mass of humanity believes that the world is created by God. It is not so. The world is a projection upon Brahman, God. The divinity that is Brahman constitutes the world as well. Brahman and the world are indeed the same. It is the combination of the component elements that causes an apparent difference between them. Okay, so what's he saying here? Let's get ourselves back to where we were. So he says, world is God. So actually, let's go back to the first thing he said. The mass of humanity believes that the world is created by God. So again, it's that same idea. We'll probably keep bringing this up every time it happens. The mass of which part of humanity? Okay, the mass of humanity that is in that religious mindset, in that religious way of thinking. And there's a distinction I'm drawing here between a religious way of thinking and a spiritual or a philosophical way of thinking. The mass of humanity caught up in the religious mindset believes that the world is created by God. So there is a creator being, someone who sits apart from the world and has created it. And we refer to as him, he, generally speaking. So Vedanta does not have this perspective. So Vedanta's statement is that the world is God, not created by God. So it's important that we don't conflate the world as God with God as the world. Right? And again, whenever we're trying to get our heads around this, go back to the analogy of the dream and the waking. Your whole dream, everything in it, the landscape, the people, the plants, the animals, the space between you and other objects, the air you're breathing, it's all nothing but your own mind. So the dream is mind. Makes sense. But you can't say that the mind is the dream. The mind is not the dream. The mind exists here in the waking state, where there is no dream. So the mind is not equivalent to the dream, but the dream is entirely made up of mind. And so you could rewrite that sentence from the previous section of the book. The dream world is a projection upon the mind, and the mind constitutes the dream world as well. Mind and the dream world are indeed the same. So that's understandable when we think of it that way. The dream world is projected upon my mind. My mind is the thing that makes up the dream world. So when I'm looking at my dream world, I am looking at my mind. Mind and dream world are the same. So we draw that analogy one level up into our experience. Everything that we are experiencing is, if you like, the dream world. Everything here in what we call the waking state, everything that we call the dream state, everything we call deep sleep, we consider that to be a single phenomenon, which we described earlier, or labelled as conditioned consciousness. That whole thing is projected upon something, just as the dream is projected upon the mind. What's it projected upon? I don't know, but let's call it God, or let's call it reality, or let's call it, as he does here, Brahman. So Brahman, Sanskrit term, which simply means the reality. It's another one of these placeholders. So one of the things he says here is that consciousness is one. Okay, what do we mean by that? He goes into a list of pointers towards the reality, and the first one he gives in that list, which is at the end of this chapter, is that consciousness or God is one, not differentiated, or not two, not more than one. It's not split up into, oh, you've got up God and down God, you've got blue God and green God, and when you mix the blue and the green God, you get a different colour God. No, it's not like that. There's only an undifferentiated mass of consciousness. Fine, but then why do we see different properties in the world? We have properties that are opposite to each other. We have properties that complement each other, that are different degrees of the same thing, that are completely unalike to each other. So then if we've got all of these different properties in the world, how have they arisen from something which is undifferentiated? So again, this will be one of these questions that defeats the intellect, and that when we approach, we must surrender to. But that process of approaching and surrendering does require some intellectual work. We get close enough to it to satisfy the intellect, that's demand for knowledge, understanding, pattern recognition, cause-effect relationships, and then we surrender. So as the text continues, he gives an example. Actually, he gives three examples. The first is triangles and square. Okay, so what do we have here? We have four triangles, each with their own specific properties. 3 angles, 190 degree, 3 sides, etc. They are all exactly the same. They are one, if you want to put it that way. Whether you've got one of them or a million of them, it's the same thing. It's the same repeating unit. When you bring them together, you of course get a square, something which has different properties. It has 4 angles, it has 4 sides. So what's happened here is you have something with completely novel properties arising from something that did not have those properties. How has it happened? It's the combination of the component elements. So that's the first example. Second example he gives is that of burning hydrogen gas. So hydrogen is a combustible gas. Oxygen supports combustion. When you bring the two of them together, you get water, which extinguishes combustion. Something which is combustion or combustible generates something which puts out combustion, puts out fire. So they are completely opposite in their properties. One supports combustion, one extinguishes it. How has this happened? Same sort of idea. You have on the one side of the equation matter in a particular configuration. When you take those exact same bits of matter and reconfigure them, you get a completely different set of properties. Now they're diametrically opposed to what you started with. So what's the difference? We call it something else, and it has a different formulation, a different structure, name and form. That's the only difference between the hydrogen, oxygen, and the water. Third example he gives is that of diamond and graphite. Both of them are carbon. Just carbon atoms stuck together. But of course their properties are wildly different. Diamond is super hard, graphite is soft. Transparent, opaque, valuable, cheap, etc. Why do you have these different properties? If it's just carbon atoms, it's the way that they are structured. So the structure gives different properties here. So these are the three examples. What's he saying? The three examples of the triangle, square, hydrogen, oxygen, and diamond graphite says that we can get novel properties arising from a new combination, contradictory properties, and relative properties, relative differences, all arising from different combinations of our starting element. What he says here, or the conclusion he makes here, is that this is just the way that nature functions. You don't need to invoke some sort of creator being in order for this to happen. You put four triangles together and get a square. You can't say that there was a creator necessary for that transition to happen. It's the way that nature is. So there are obviously some objections that you would need to suspend in order to accept what's just been presented. If consciousness is undifferentiated, then there's no space between the parts, so you can't bring them together. Okay, it's a fairly obvious one. The point here is not to expect these analogies to completely describe what we're looking to understand. They don't have to carry your understanding all the way to self-realization. They only have to carry it far enough for you to say, okay, all right, yeah, I see what they're saying, that different combinations create completely different properties. We're saying that the consciousness is one and undifferentiated. I guess in a similar way, if it somehow combines with itself in a different way, you might get different qualities and properties. I don't know how it would happen, but I see what it's saying. So it's important that we have a clear understanding of what the analogies are for, what their limitations are, and use them to get us to the next point. You know, there's a beautiful quote earlier on in this text. It's almost a repetition of one that's in Vedanta Treatise. And he says that should provide adequate material for a spiritual seeker to investigate its purpose in your life. Now what's he talking about? He's talking about that sense of I am. So the analogies don't prove anything. They're not proof. They're not even evidence. They are ways to get us inspired in our continued reflection and investigation into what this thing is. Vedanta declares, therefore, the difference between world and Brahman is the difference between triangles and square, between hydrogen, oxygen and water, between charcoal and diamond. The same divinity that is Brahman is the world. The world is not any different from Brahman. All the differences lie in just name and form, nama rupa, nothing else. So having described the world as God, he now brings it in. He started with the macrocosm. When he was describing the world as God, giving the analogy of the dream state, it's a very outward focused approach, looking out there. That whole thing that I see, that is God. The same concept, the same idea now, he brings it into the microcosm, to the individual. He says, divinity, your original nature. He says the nature of each individual is divine. The supreme Godhead lies within you. It is your original nature. That explains why you cannot rest until you discover your original self, Godhead. Individuals are like rivers. They cannot rest until they reach the ocean. Thus, every human being is pressurized to reach his original state. Okay, so as I say, he's bringing the awareness back within now. One of the things that we observe in nature is that everything strives to return to a ground state. He gave the analogy of rivers. Water in general, it moves until it reaches a ground state. It rests. It has that potential energy by virtue of being higher than sea level. It continues to walk its way down, down, down until it reaches sea level, and then it rests. The example he gives in some of the texts is that of a coiled spring. So you take a coiled spring and you compress it with your hands. What do you experience? Well, you experience pressure. As you release your hand, you feel less and less pressure until such time as there's no pressure. When do you feel no pressure? When it reaches its original manufactured state. It's in a state of rest. So he talks about the same thing with regards to the human being. We are constantly feeling pressurized within ourselves. We are pushing against what we conceive, or rather what we perceive as constraints. I want to live my own life. I want to make my own decisions, unencumbered, unrestrained by the expectations of my parents or society. I want to be me. There's a pressure, there's a desire. I want to be wealthy. I want a partner. I want to raise a family. I want deeper spiritual knowledge. We feel constrained by our nature, the way that it currently is. And when I say our nature, I don't just mean the way we are in our body, mind and intellect. Extend that outwards, extend your nature outwards into the world. I feel constrained by the way I am in this world. How do we know we are constrained? We are acting to make changes. So there is always this striving for something, with the fond hope that when I have completed all of my causes, at the other end of it will be this superior sense of well-being. So that's what we're striving towards. What are we striving towards? We're striving towards a sense of peace, happiness, contentment, satisfaction, by gaining certain objects. It can be a material object, I want a new car. It can be a physical object, I want to feel strong. Emotional object, I want to belong. Intellectual object, I want knowledge, I want autonomy, etc. But when we get that object, there's a sense of peace or rest that comes with it. That's what we're looking for. Mental peace, freedom from the constraints that we earlier experienced, and absence of agitation. So mental agitation arises from unfulfilled desires. That's what drives us. The agitation from our existing desires is what drives us, because we're looking to minimize that. You may be familiar with the phrase drive reduction. Drive reduction is one of the things that describes why we do stuff. I'm hungry. It's my drive. I eat to reduce the drive. So, when he's talking about our original nature, he uses this analogy of the coiled spring to make us recognize that we are pressured. We are pushing against what is. So how do we relate to these desires? What should we be doing with them? Where it is, this is a whole nother discussion, but really just to summarize, where it is our obligation, work through that desire. Work to gain the object that the mind is asking you for. But while you're doing it, recognize that when I get the object, I won't have truly the thing that I'm looking for. There'll be a temporary sense, there'll be a temporary sense of satisfaction. I got the job. I got the diploma. I got the partner. First child is born. Something has been gained and you get a sense of satisfaction from it. But the satisfaction that you gain isn't permanent. You may no longer need that object. Once you've got your PhD, you don't feel like another one. When you've got a couple of kids, you don't feel like you need any more. You've got the thing. But your sense of mental peace that you got from that diminishes over time as other concerns now come into place. So the satisfaction of desire gives us a temporary sense of peace. It's not true freedom. True freedom is to be free from desire per se. Take a simple example. You're a cigarette smoker. I am free to smoke cigarettes. You absolutely are. You're very wealthy, so you can afford cigarettes for the rest of your life, short though it may be. And you can smoke anytime you wish. And so you have a craving. There's an agitation. The body feels it. The mind feels it. I need a cigarette. You have a cigarette and there is peace. Okay, now to say I'm free to smoke cigarettes, I'm free to gain that sense of satisfaction is true, but true freedom would be not to have the desire for cigarettes at all. Then you'd be truly free. Take that example and apply it to every object of desire that you have. Yes, you're right, you're free to enjoy the benefits of all the things that the world offers. But to be truly free would be to be free from the desire for them per se. When you have no desires for anything, there is no pressure. You accept what is. You are in your original state, just as the spring has been returned to its original state. So it's a beautiful sounding image. The problem with this is that the ego can appropriate good ideas for its own ends, and we can end up misusing or even abusing some of these concepts. So to say that a person is free from desire is not the same thing as saying there is indifference. You take a self-realized soul. They are free from desire. All desires have been eradicated, and yet you find them working tirelessly to educate others. Writing books and teaching classes, or perhaps this particular self-realized soul is building homes, and this one here is writing songs and singing them. And they're passionate. They are passionate about their work. How is this possible? To be free from desire is not the same thing as to be free from interest or passion or caring. It's not to be free of action. When you lack interest, when you lack passion, when you lack things that you care about, it means that your nature is suppressed. When you lack action, it means that your nature is suppressed. This is the state known as tamas. So if you're familiar with the three gunas, there are three mental temperaments: tamas, rajas, sattva. I'm not going into them here. But tamas is this state of indifference. It's the suppression of our intellect, our mind, and our body. We're not interested, we're not passionate, we don't care, and we don't act. So the ego can appropriate ideas of being free from desire and say, no, I am free from the desire for partnership and children and family and accumulating so much wealth and material goods. I don't need any of that. I'm free from desire. It's possible that that's true for that person. They have reached that level of development. It's also possible that they are simply in a state of having their nature suppressed. And in fact, they may have suppressed it themselves because the whole idea of getting into the dating pool and finding someone and taking the responsibility of family is just too much to even think about. Oh, I could never do it. I don't have the resources. So, I'm going to pretend I don't need it. Suppress my nature, fall into indifference, and give it the thin veneer of spirituality on top. So it's a very important point to clearly distinguish between, or to clearly understand what freedom from desire actually is. Okay, I think we'll leave it there for today. Any questions before we finish off? Okay, thanks folks. As always, appreciate the attention and questions. We're back on Tuesday evening Pacific time for Bhagavad-Gita, continuing chapter 16, and then again rolling back to Thesis on God next Sunday. So for those joining, I'll see you then. Hari Om.